Hi, everybody. Joy Forrest with Call to Peace Ministries, and I'm here today again with Dr. Debra Wingfield from House of Peace Publications. Debra and I have been doing an advocacy course together, and Debra is going to be speaking at our spring retreat, Free Indeed, which is going to be May the 23rd through the 26th. And Debra has some wonderful expertise that I am going to pick her brain on today. Actually, she's made a PowerPoint for us, so I might not do very much talking. But the reason I was so excited to meet Debra is that working with victims of domestic abuse, I often see that an abusive parent will try to alienate his own children against their mother, usually is what we end up seeing. And so, Debra, you have worked with this a lot over the last, how many decades now?
About 4+.
What I thought. Yeah, so you've actually helped several of the ladies in our group, and you've just been a godsend. So we're really grateful to have you. And so what I wanted to do is I ask you today for this is a shortened version of what we'll get at the conference, but to talk about some strategies that victims of abuse can use when they're having to co-parent with an abusive person. In fact, you've got a book about it, and you can talk about that if you want as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, thank you, Joy, and I'm glad to be here and to talk about building resilience, because I have lots of questions from lots of mothers about how do we build resilience in our children when they're going back and forth between an abuser parent and a safe parent. And just to be clear, the abuser parent is sometimes using coercive control without violence as well as with violence. And children actually see and hear a lot more than parents seem to realize, because the children get kind of shoved into the background. So when parents separate, one of the things that they realize is that their children have a lot of issues as a result of having observed domestic violence, heard it, seen the after effects, and as a result, they're having problems with emotion regulation, and they're having problems adapting to differences that are going on in their lives. So at the spring conference, I will be doing a full presentation on building resilience in children. Right here, what I want to do is just hit some of the highlights that I'll cover at the conference. And then I'm open to questions via email, and you can contact me with any of your questions at askdrdebraw.com. So that's askdrdebraw.com. And I'll be able to answer those questions for you to the best of my ability. Sometimes I have to do a little research, but most of the time I've got those answers right on the top of my brain.
Well, that's the thing you're really good at. You're great at researching things for me. In fact, I'm used to doing a lot of these videos off the cuff, and you're like, let me do a little research, which is fantastic. I need that. I've just gotten to where I'm headlong into ministry, so I sometimes forget that, well, I mean, we all have to go back and do some research sometimes, but I think that you are, being a college professor, you're more apt to do that just naturally than I am. So right. We're grateful.
Thank you. And I do like to be able to come up with peer-reviewed research. There's a lot of information out there, and not all of it's peer-reviewed. Some of those journals tend to be involved with organizations that basically what they do is they quote all the other people in the organization, but they really don't get out and do a broad cross-section of the research. And being trained in my doctoral program to do that, I'm very conscientious about making sure that we give a balanced view.
Yeah, and really what's interesting is I put something about parental alienation on my website a couple of years back, and our mutual friend Julie Owen says, no, Joy, we can't call it that anymore because the abusers have stolen that term.
Mm-hmm.
Now they call it DV by proxy, but you said it's got another new term now, right? Or is there something else that what you're calling
Yeah, they're trying
protective
to
parent?
shift the focus, calling it disaffection, estrangement, and using different terms to say the same thing. And
Yeah,
basically what it is brainwashing the children against the safe parent
yes,
and
yeah.
trying to prevent the children from having a relationship with their safe parent.
Yeah, and it happens all the time because we know that abusive people will use whatever is valuable to their victim um, as a weapon. You know, so they'll go after what counts most, and of course, that's usually the children.
Right. And of course, that's the one way that abusers can continue to hurt the victim or the safe parent once they've separated, is they can use the children as leverage to get to them. And what's really sad is the harm to the children, the long-term harm, and that's part of what we'll talk about when we talk about building resilience. We have to understand the impacts on the children as well. So I'll just hit some highlights of that today.
That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So you can go ahead, and if you want to do the screen share, I'm ready to learn.
Okay, I'm going to do that. And let's see. I need to get in here.
There we go.
And there we go.
Mm-hmm.
So my talk that I will be giving at the conference is called Build Up Our Children, because we want to build our children up and provide them with the skills that they need in order to be strong and be functioning adults when they get to adulthood, because for many of them, after they've been exposed to domestic abuse and coercive control, they have some healing that they need to do. So we want to give them a chance to do that. And the sooner, the better. So what we know about children who are exposed to domestic violence, coercive control, is we'll very often see depression. I hear a lot of mothers concerned about the anxiety of their children being socially withdrawn, that they're trying to avoid being involved with activities because they start developing trust issues. I hear a lot of problems with impairment in regulating emotions, and emotion dysregulation is something that is really starting to be studied in the literature, and we're starting to understand about what that does for children and brain development. And we see a lot of aggression and conduct problems in children and youth, and it can be happening even in the lower grades, in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. Actually had a mother today say, her son missed her so much because he's spending so much time with dad and not an equal amount of time with mom, that he didn't want to go to school today. And so that becomes a conduct problem in the school, and he's in first grade.
Listen,
So insecure, yeah.
I was gonna say I've seen this so many times. In fact, way before we started this ministry, I worked in the schools, and there was this little boy that was always bullying people. And I'll say too, even in our support groups, we have fights in the support groups all the time among the children because they're so traumatized. But this one little boy who was such a bully, turns out that his dad, there was a domestic violence going on in the home, and then this child ended up witnessing his dad shoot and kill his mother about a year and a half later. So that was a warning sign for us that the school we missed. So,
Yeah. So we have a lot of aggression We have insecure attachments because children don't have any sense of safety, stability. And when we have parenting plans that have the children going back and forth frequently, that creates problems. And then we add to that some of the issues with so many different messages coming to the children from each home. And so they don't know what the rules are. So we'll talk about insecure attachment and how to work with that, the effects of trauma on children. And we now know the neurobiological effects of trauma and how they can have actually lifetime impacts. So we want to be addressing that. Diminished school performance, or the opposite of that is children who actually achieve in school because that's the only place they feel safe.
Yeah.
So sometimes we'll see children wanting to come in early from before school. They want to stay after school because that's a place that's safe for them. And then compromised academic achievement, where it's not just their school performance, but they don't feel like they have the ability to get ahead, to move ahead. And so they'll cut short their school. They'll drop out of school instead of completing public schools and going on into college. So we see those problems. And then I talk with community college professors who are saying how much this is actually spills over into the community college and the kinds of things they're working with there. So it's very interesting that it doesn't stop just because the kids hit 18 and they're no longer in this power struggle with the parents, but they're still having to overcome all of that. So we want to give them some good skills there. So brain architecture supports lifelong learning, behavior, and health. And we've got a picture of the brain and what's going on in the brain here with motor skill development, language, memory, and visual development and emotional development, and then behavioral control. And one of the things that we know that we didn't know until probably the last 5 to 10 years is the prefrontal cortex, that's the very front of our brains, which is the executive function, is not fully developed until around age 25. So we're putting even older adolescents, teens, and young 20s into an environment where we're expecting them to be making adult decisions, and they don't even have the brain development to be making those kind of decisions. So we really have to rethink some of the way we've got our educational system set up. So we know that early experiences shape brain architecture, and that goes from prenatal all the way into the early learning years up until 6 or 7. And even though simple skills come first, the more complex skills can build on top of them. And so when we're doing early childhood education, we may be doing some simple science experiments with children even in ages 3, 4, 5, and 6. What those do is they prepare them so that when they get into elementary school, middle school, and high school, they've already started creating those tracks in their brains to develop those skills. And we also know that the earlier you start reading to children, the better, because children who are read to early and come into school with a vocabulary that's much further advanced than children who are not read to, the children who are not given enrichment activities in those early years. And it can take them up to 3rd grade to actually catch up with children who are coming from homes where there's a lot of enrichment. So that's key. Mm-hmm. So a strong foundation in the early years improves the odds for positive outcomes, and a weak foundation increases the odds of problems later in life. So we really want to look at what we can do to build that strong foundation in children. And so we want to talk about the 3 types of stress that impact brain architecture. And positive stress, because stress is something that we experience positively, negatively, or toxically. So positive stress is a necessary aspect of healthy development. It occurs in the context of stable, supportive relationships. And this is where we have problems when there is estrangement from one parent, when parents are kept out of a child's life, because maybe that is the stable parent. Maybe that is the parent who actually the children can open up to, that they can express their full range of feelings to, that they're not limited to what's okay and what's not okay. And one of the things that I hear a lot of is, well, my kids can't say that they love me in front of their dad because their dad gets angry with them and he thinks they're being disloyal, that they can only love one person, they can't love both parents, when children need to have the freedom to love both their parents. Mm-hmm. And so with positive stress, we have a brief increase in heart rate and mild changes in stress hormone levels. So when you and I get together and we're talking with each other, it lifts us up and we feel good about ourselves and we feel good about the work that we're doing. Mm-hmm. And we want to bring that kind of positive stress to children because it gives them a chance to get those endorphins going in their brains, those feel-good hormones. So tolerable stress is a stress response, excuse me, that can disrupt brain architecture. However, it's buffered by supportive relationships. So here we have a great Norman Rockwell picture of a child seeing the doctor. And what do children talk about when they see the doctor? You know, they're concerned about shots, they're concerned about it could hurt, those kinds of things. However, what we do is we create a tolerable stress for them by nurturing them through that, by giving them the opportunity to feel okay about themselves in the process of going through that exam, getting that shot. And it allows the brain to an opportunity to recover from any potentially damaging effects. With toxic stress is strong, prolonged activation of the body's stress response systems. And what we know about this is that the hormone cortisol gets activated when there's toxic stress. And we now know that that actually has an effect on the adrenal function. And the adrenal glands actually can get burnt out in children and young adults, and adults who become fatigued because of adrenal stress, because of stress that they've encountered throughout their lives. So how that happens is there's no buffering protection of an adult. So a child falls down, hurts themselves, and instead of being nurtured, cuddled for a minute, said, it's okay, you're going to do fine, I'm right here, I'll take care of you. Instead, what they do is the toxic parent will actually say, oh, brush it off, get up. We don't do tears in this family.
Or serves you right. Serves you right for doing what you were doing.
Right. And the child gets blamed. So it can damage developing brain architecture and creates a short fuse for the body's stress response systems. And it can lead to lifelong problems in learning, behavior, and both physical and mental health. So we really want to look at what's happening to a child when they're under toxic stress. And when that's happening on a regular basis, what happens is the child begins to have more anxiety, more depression, less motivation, less willingness to learn and be involved in life. So one of the studies that came out in 1998 was the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and this was a study that was supported by the Centers for Disease Control and was the result of Dr. Folletti, who was a preventive physician at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. And what he found when he did this study is the individuals that he had brought in for weight management because they were obese, that what they would do is they would get to a certain point in their weight management program and they would either drop out or they would begin to gain weight again and get discouraged with the program. So they went in and did a social history on those people. And they found that there were, at that point, they had identified 10 adverse childhood experiences. They've since added more. That those adverse childhood experiences lead to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. And as a result, there's an adoption of health risk behaviors. And with those health risk behaviors, what we see is disease, disability, and social problems. So some of those diseases are heart diseases, diabetes, cancer, substance abuse, and other types of illnesses that actually lead to an earlier death. So a person who may have had a longer lifespan because of those adverse childhood experiences also has a shortened lifespan. So what we want to do is we want to identify those and create resilience, help people adapt to those experiences to avoid that toxic stress and to be able to manage those adverse childhood experiences. So what do we know? Violent homes have the same effect on children's brains as combat on soldiers. And we get concerned about soldiers and PTSD. What we're now identifying, and it's become acceptable practice to identify post-traumatic stress disorder in children, which for many years the psychological associations were not addressing that. But now we are actually seeing that.
And I did an interview with my friend Chris Moles this morning, and we were talking about when you say violence, people tend to think physical violence, battering, and what studies have also shown is that it does not have to be physically abusive. Like, so there doesn't have to be any physical injury, but verbal abuse and emotional abuse and those things have the exact same effect on the children
Right.
as you know, physical battery.
So all those different types of coercive control that
Mm-hmm.
we talk about.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of children coming out of homes going through divorces with their parents where there's been a lot of coercive control without violence. And it is not a crime in this country at this point. However, the United Kingdom has actually identified coercive control as a crime and have found ways to actually prosecute that. So we have a model to work from. We just have to work towards that.
Yeah.
So, and the question that I get asked so often is, well, how do I build up resilience in my children? And one of the things that I always look at is, what are your children's multiple intelligences? Because we're not just unilateral people. We aren't just a brain functioning. We're a whole person. And some of us have strengths in some areas and weaknesses in other areas. So some of us have the ability to have more interpersonal relationships. And we can talk with other people easily and we can develop friendships. Others of us have bodily kinesthetic strengths where maybe what we're able to do is more athletic. Our bodies are where we achieve. because we have talents there. We may have verbal linguistic skills, such as the ability to talk. And I'm sitting here and I think about that. And when I tell people that I used to be a shy little girl, they go like, oh, I can't believe that.
Yeah.
But I had to develop those verbal linguistic skills because that was how I needed to shift and become stronger as a human being. Some of us have naturalist intelligence, where we really relate to plants, the environment, rocks, whatever is out there. I mean, you know, we have geologists for a reason. Those are people who love to study what's going on with our earth.
I've got a grandson like that. He
Yeah.
wants to be an entomologist when he grows up.
Okay.
He loves bugs, but he likes all sorts of other things in nature too. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And some of us have logical mathematical skills. Some people, math comes easy to. Other people, it's like, oh, I can't even figure out how to do a simple algebra problem. And it's because we're multi-talented individuals, and not everyone has the same strengths and intelligences. Some of us have musical talents and intelligence there. Some of us can learn musical skills, and yet that's not a strength of ours. Some of us have spatial skills where we get into artistic design, architecture, drawing, those kinds of things. Some of us do better intrapersonally. So we do better going inside and figuring out what's going on inside of us. And maybe that creates someone who writes books for us, who writes stories and develops their imagination that way. And then we have an existentialist intelligence, which allows us to see the bigger picture, which allows us to move out of just what's in front of us every day. So we want to really explore that with our children and find out what are their interests, what are they curious about. And that means we want to expose our children to whatever we possibly can in their world so that they can explore those things and find out what is interesting to them. So from multiple intelligences, we want to develop social emotional intelligence as well. And part of the reason that I bring this out in relationship to coercive control and domestic abuse is we have to help our children express their feelings. So many of the children who are going through these adverse situations have their feelings cut off, aren't able to express themselves in ways that are helpful for them to be able to get through. So we want to work with them on that. And that means that we want to start with that empathy center. We want to teach them about having empathy for other people. We do know from all the work that we do with those who are abusing children as well as other adults is that they have low to no empathy. And the reason that they can do that abuse is because they don't see the impact of their behavior on another person. So we want to teach our children to develop empathy, to think about other people and how that might impact them. And I had an interesting example today from another person in a group that I'm in where she says when she's driving by a bus stop in very cold Canadian country and she sees people sitting out there shivering, she has a lot of empathy for them because she's driving by in a warm car and they're sitting there out in the cold waiting at the bus stop. And so she then feels gratitude for what she's able to have, but she also sends them blessings to improve their lives.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to
Go
say,
ahead.
with empathy is to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and to imagine what they might be experiencing, maybe even based on what you've been through. Whereas, I saw a video the other day, the difference between empathy and sympathy, where sympathy is, oh, you poor, poor, pitiful thing. And it's not entering into their pain or to, understanding how it's impacting them. So it's
Hmm.
really more of a judgmental thing to say, oh, you poor thing, be warm, be at peace.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, too bad for you.
Hmm.
And usually, a lot of times too, even with the sympathy, it's like, well, if you just done this, that wouldn't have happened, rather than, so there's a more of a judgmental tone. So we're not even talking about sympathy as much as empathy, for sure, where it's being able to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, or to at least imagine that.
Exactly. And decision making. I mean, for so many of the children that are in these situations, some of the decision making about their lives is actually taken over by the courts, and they don't feel like they have choices. And then in other situations, it's like, well, I have choices when I go to my safe parents' home, and I can choose what I want to do here. But when I go to my abuser parent home, who is wanting to be in total control of everything that's going on with me, I don't get to make decisions. I don't get to think for myself. So we want to develop that idea of thinking for yourself, making choices, being aware of the consequences of your choices. And then we want to look at, in this particular diagram, self-esteem or self-worth. We want to really help people build up that sense of, I'm okay as a human being. And I don't need somebody else's stamp of approval to make me an okay person. I'm okay just as I am.
Right. And so, is I'll put in the biblical slant on that, is I am valuable because God made me. I'm made in the image of God, and He values me. So if the one who created me sees me as valuable, then I am valuable. And so I always tell people, if the perfect God tells you you're valuable and you're worthy, then an imperfect person has no right to tell you otherwise. So, especially an angry, imperfect person. So,
That's so true. And with that sense of self-worth also comes motivation. Motivation to try new things, motivation to get outside your box, to get clear about where you want to go with your life and what you want to do with your life. And then making commitments to, as children, complete a project, to check things out, to set a course for more than a day or more than an hour. And then we want to develop that interpersonal awareness, that ability to understand what's going on with other people, as well as what's going on with myself in relationship to that other person. So even in our discussion, Joy, we're both aware of the other person's strengths, and we talk back and forth as we do an interview like this, because we know who that other person is. So that's interpersonal awareness, and we've just modeled it.
yeah, we do that a lot in our advocacy class, in case anybody's interested in that.
That's a great plug there.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. So one of the things that was developed a number of years ago by the Search Institute was a program called Developmental Assets. Now the Search Institute, let me say that again because I'm tripping over my words. The Search Institute was actually developed through the Lutheran Church Foundation. The Lutheran Church Foundation wanted to know how to actually build up the youth in their congregations and to provide them ways to protect them from high-risk behaviors, and to promote positive attitudes and behaviors. So what the Search Institute did is they did a lot of research with originally 6th to 12th grade students, and they've now expanded that down into lower ages, as well as taken the assets and looked at them even on the adult level. And we look at what are the kind of assets that we can develop in children. And in my talk, I'll be talking about the 8 primary developmental assets, and then the different factors that come underneath each one of those assets, and how you can use those to build intentionally those kind of assets in children and youth. So Developmental Assets is a real good resilience training program, and what I would suggest to anyone who's watching this is if you just Google Search Institute, you will get to their website, and you can look at many, many ideas of how you can build up skills in your children. And when you build up those resilient skills, you make a huge difference for your children. So that's all I'm going to talk about
All right.
for today.
Well, how about, can I ask you a few questions?
Sure.
All right. So again, we do see it's like a brainwashing, and I always tell some of the ladies that I work with, they're talking about, I can't believe that that my abuser is actually turning my children that I was so close to against me. How is that happening? And so what I've observed is a lot of times, they will become the Disneyland parent, all of a sudden giving these children whatever they want, where they had been so strict before. Well, he used to be mean and now he's nice and he's changed. Really, he has. And so, but they're so upset because their children are falling for it. And sometimes they're not young children, they're adult children who are being estranged from their parent. And so I always tell them, I said, well, how long did you fall for it? Fall for what? Well, how long did he have your thinking all twisted like that? And so we definitely see that it's something that it's very, very common. And I'm really curious to find out from you, like some very specific tactics, skills, thinking kind of skills that we can give our children to help them think through. I did like in your book, so you have a book. Give me the name of the book, Co-Parenting.
Eyes Wide Open, Help with Control Freak Co-Parents.
And there you go. And so, well, that you talk about it in that book, but you also have a journal that you made for young people. And I love in the journal, it says, before the separation, the parent who took me to the doctor was. Before the separation, the parent who did this for me, to help them start thinking through. So is this going to be like one of the strategies that you would use, is to help them reason through their history, to look at, to reason through it, I guess is what I'm asking.
Mm-hmm. And that can be very helpful to help children compare and contrast, what's changed? How is it different now? Mm-hmm. The other thing that I encourage parents to do is to teach their children to look at, do the words match the actions? Mm-hmm. And I actually had a mom create this game with her 6-year-old where she taught her words actions. So if the words match the actions, then that person is probably on target and you want to trust what's going on. But if the words don't match the actions, then you want to really think about, are they really telling me the truth? Or are they actually trying to convince me to think the way they're thinking? Mm-hmm. And is this the way I thought, again, before the separation versus after the separation?
Yeah.
Because children are very knowledgeable, and they'll come back with, I know what daddy says. We'll just use daddy as an example. I know what daddy says, but he's not telling the truth because he doesn't know that you love me. And he doesn't know that I love you, but he tells me that I can't love you and love him at the same time.
Yeah.
And so children get it. Sometimes what they do is they actually figure out that in order to survive, and it is a survival skill, in order to survive with that abuser controlling parent, is I have to act in a certain way when I'm there. And then I have to act a different way when I'm with that safe parent. I can basically be who I am with that safe parent.
And sometimes I think it takes a while for them to get it, though. It's so confusing because we know that abusive people are master manipulators, and they spin everything to get you confused and wondering what the truth really is. And so, and a lot of times they'll even share misinformation about the other parent. But we have a situation that we've been dealing with, and the woman was just very grieved. Her kids were turning against her, and she said, I had a moment the other day when the oldest daughter said, Daddy doesn't like me to call you. He gets really upset if I try to call you at night. And she says, and I don't know that he says that to her, but she's finally figured it out. He'll let us stay up long enough that we don't have time to call you. No, we've got to get in the bed right this moment. And I know it's because he doesn't want me talking to you. So she's finally figuring it out. The other ones, the smaller ones, haven't figured it out yet. So anyway, so at our retreat, you're going to give some other ideas and some strategies that people can use to help combat this. And we'll be talking about all ages and different strategies for all different ages. Is that something you have planned? I don't know. I'm asking.
Well, that's definitely something that I can be talking about, because I work with parents of infants all the way up to teenagers. And so, yes, I can talk about different strategies and different kinds of things that parents can be doing to actually recall for their children their clear thinking versus the distorted thinking that they're being presented with by the abuser. So,
well, that brings to mind one other thing. I think that what I have found, because I really question people, like, how did you deal with this coming along? I was never really estranged by the courts or anything, but I was estranged because my kids just kind of flat out, they took turns rejecting me. But one thing that I had always done, and I regret to this day, is, I didn't want to speak ill of my ex-husband, and I still don't think I would have. That's not what I'm regretting. But what I did was always make excuses for him. He just can't help himself. He grew up with abuse. He doesn't know any better. We just need to pray for him that, so I was so nice and kind and benevolent towards him in my comments to him that I didn't really call out the behavior. I think that when I talked to some of the women who have been estranged, they did the same kind of thing. They covered it up. They made excuses. And so I think that being able to learn how to speak the truth in a way that is not critical or basically not putting them down, but showing what unhealthy behavior looks like. So you address the behavior without really disparaging the person,
Right. And that is a real important skill. And one of the things that I do ask my readers of my books is to look at the behavior, because we want to describe the behavior and then describe how you want to respond to that behavior differently than maybe you have in the past. And it's not that what you did was bad or wrong. It was what you knew to do in the moment, and now you have a choice to make a different change and to respond in a different way.
Yeah.
And I used to teach that when I taught parenting. I used to say to parents, you know, your child is not a bad child. What you don't like is the child's behavior. So you correct the behavior, always maintaining your love for your child.
Yeah.
And so we have to really separate that out. And that's a boundary issue. So we do have to teach boundaries. We have to, and what are healthy boundaries?
Yes.
Because in families where there's been abuse, there's enmeshment, there can be disconnection. So we want to actually teach healthy boundaries. How do you go back and forth with things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, we talked about that in our support group one night, and one of the ladies she just was not having that issue with her kids, and she was one that she said, I read a boundaries book when my kids were small, and I just started enforcing them, and for some reason, I mean, it really helped them, even though she wasn't enforcing them against her husband. I think the fact that she was teaching them that this is not an acceptable behavior, it sort of transferred over so that her kids were never really fooled by him trying to win them over. So it was an interesting discussion that night in the group. So yeah, there's a lot of things involved. I mean, it is very, what's the word? Very complex. It's a difficult thing to untangle. When you're dealing with abuse, it's just, it's not like anything else out there. I think that people who have not dealt with abuse don't even understand that this dynamic exists. How could anybody do that to their children? But, you know, I tell people all you got to do is watch the news. And, you know, domestic violence, how many times do abusers not only take their partners' lives, but their children's lives?
Right.
You know, in an effort, it's all about, they care more about control than any person, including their own children.
And that goes back to their lack of empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've seen abusers actually take out the children and leave the mother because they know that will hurt her more than to take her out and remove her.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And there's actually a case that went to the UN that the UN actually determined it was a human rights violation, the way the case was handled.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have so much that has happened, and we learn way too slowly.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like you and I talk in the course all the time. The courts don't get it. There's just such a huge lack of training among court professionals. Even abusers are able to use the court as a weapon. They're able to use their children as weapons. They're able to use their churches as weapons because our churches don't get it. It's just there's such a huge lack of knowledge out there, and so that's what we're trying to counter here. So I appreciate you doing this video with me today. I'm really looking forward to what you're going to have to say at the retreat, and I'll put some information in the I guess in the text below where you can go and sign up for the retreat. It's a 3-day retreat at the beach in North Carolina in May. It'll be beautiful. May the 20th to the, wait a minute, it's 23rd to the 26th. Sorry.
Right.
Getting confused with another thing. And that'll be a Thursday night, Friday, and a Saturday night. Only $225, and that includes all your meals and lodging. And you know, we will have some partial scholarships and maybe some full scholarships. We're trying to do a drive to get some scholarship money. So don't let money keep you away if you really think this is something that you need to come to. The other things we'll have at the conference, we actually have a local therapist from the Raleigh area who has developed a curriculum for child sexual abuse survivors, but she's going to talk about all sorts of sexual abuse and how do you move forward and heal from that. She'll be doing breakout sessions on that. I'll be doing breakout sessions on just general keys to healing. And I think my workbook is going to be coming out. And you've got a workbook too, which you can bring and sell at the conference, because it's kind of, we both have a similar idea that we encourage a lot of journaling. Mine is just got scriptures that you can look up along the way, and just it's broken down into separate lessons. But anyway, we believe that it's going to be very powerful, because I think we'll have small groups. It's kind of going to be like we'll have people going off into little miniature support groups throughout the conference, but we'll give you time to go to the beach and to just be there for one another. I think it'll be a really good community building retreat, and we're just expecting wonderful things from it. And so we hope you can come. And if you got any questions, feel free to contact us. My email address is info at calledtopeace.org, calledtopeace.org. So Dr. Debra, anything else you want to say before we end it?
I'm looking forward to the conference, looking forward to time at the beach.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we will see you. I'll see you way before May, but thank you for your time. All right.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.